know that sleep, hydration, and nutrition are really critical for recovery and then leading into performance, but I'd argue that sleep is probably the most important factor out of the three, because out of our entire day, we spend a majority of our recovery time in this sleep state. So making sure we get it right is really, really critical for you to be able to recover and then perform the next day, throughout the week, and throughout your entire training cycle. So today we're breaking down 8 key tips for you to sleep better to maximize your performance as an athlete. Hey guys, Nick here. Welcome back to the channel, talking science of endurance and everything sports science in general. Welcome to the channel if you're watching for the first time, or if you're a return viewer, please consider subscribing down below and make sure you turn the bell notification on to receive notifications of when videos go up. Going to be a lot more consistent over the next little while, so make sure you are clicking that subscribe button down below to keep up to date. Like I said in the intro, today's video is all about the sleep component of recovery, and I've talked about what we call the recovery iceberg before, so if you haven't watched that video, go check it out. I'll link it above here and also down in the description. But in terms of what we're talking about there, it's sleep, hydration, nutrition are our key pillars of recovery. They're going to give us our big 95% of our recovery, and all the other stuff can sort of give us those little 1%ers here and there. But I'd argue out of those 3 pillars, it's sleep that is the critical one. I mean, at the end of the day, if we're aiming for 7, 8, 9 hours of sleep a day, that's a large chunk of our 24-hour period in a single day that we're dedicating to that recovery, that single recovery process. And it's also where we're going to get the most bang for buck, because it's our body's shutdown time to be able to go through and repair, spend all of its time and resources on repair and recovery. Whereas throughout the day, hydration, nutrition, that's just sort of keeping us going and preparing us, but the sleep is a really critical one. So today I thought I'd talk about 8 key steps that I like to follow, but I also use to working with athletes as well, to be able to maximize their sleep, to make the most of this recovery process. So the first one I'm going to talk about here is just making sure you've got a nice quiet environment. I know it sounds quite logical and sort of straightforward, but it is a really key important factor to have, that if you're in a noisy environment, it's quite difficult to fall asleep. Particularly for athletes, I know there's not a lot of travel going on at the moment, but athletes who might travel interstate or internationally, you're on a plane, things like that, a lot of them find it very difficult to sleep on the plane. Getting things like really good quality noise cancelling headphones can be a good start. When you're at home, making sure there's things in your room that are going to allow the sound to be trapped or softened. So having carpet in your bedroom is a good start. Having a rug on the floor, soft materials. For me, I've hung my jerseys. You've seen it in the background of my really early videos at the old house. But I've hung my jerseys on my wall to give me a bit of softness on the wall to help absorb some sound. It looks good as well. Little strategies like that. That's a way you can then create a nice quiet environment. If you have to have the door shut, you have to have the door shut. There's all of these things. So it's going to be working in with what you need to work with around you, but trying to keep it as quiet as you can is going to help a long way to get to that little bit of better sleep, and also help you fall asleep a little bit quicker. Number 2, following on from that, is the room temperature. Now this one can be sometimes tricky to control and sort of get a gauge of. Approximately 18 to 20 degrees for most people, I guess, is probably a good starting point, but I don't want to limit you here, because some people like to be a little bit warmer, some like to be a little bit cooler in terms of sleeping. This is going to be a much more individual choice. So working off what's going to be best for you, I personally find it really difficult when it's too hot. So maybe something like using lighter linens, changing up what you're wearing in terms of clothing or fabrics. Maybe you have to have a fan, maybe you have to open the window. All of these different things are going to be variables that you have to consider. So working into the quietness of the environment, making sure the temperature is right for you. And you might have to discuss this if you're living with someone else, or you're sharing the room. Things like that might also be quite difficult to then get a balance. So trying to work out what works for you, but then also works in your little environment in terms of temperature, is another key factor. Because at the end of the day, we're trying to create as much comfort as possible. The more comfortable you are, the less stressed you are, the more relaxed you are, is going to lead to a much faster ability to fall asleep, but then also a better sleep throughout the entire night, because you're not going to be woken up by some of these distractions. Number 3 is routine. Can't emphasize this one enough, and I've been sort of average at it at times over the last little while, but it's the type of thing that routine really, really helps. Having a clear wake time each day and having a clear sleep time each day can just set your body clock, if you like, into this pattern of which you start to become tired at the end of the day at a certain time. You start to feel like you need to wake up, and when you get it right, you almost feel like you don't need to set an alarm. And I've definitely felt that sensation before myself, in terms of waking up in the morning 5 minutes before my alarm, and you sort of go, oh, I'm ready to hit the day. I don't necessarily feel like I need to go back to sleep. That's almost a perfect pattern of what you want to get into. So you don't necessarily have to break that sleep. You wake up naturally, which is a much better way to do it, because you're typically going to feel a little bit better when you do wake up naturally, and you're not sort of woken up by an external source like an alarm, someone else, some noise, whatever it may be. So routine is really, really critical. Moving on to number 4 is avoiding things like caffeine, a large amount of food or fluid ingestion right before you go to sleep. Fluid's the obvious one. Obviously, you don't want to be drinking a full bottle of water, 1.5 liters, a liter, whatever it is, immediately before you go to sleep, because that's going to lead to some issues in terms of waking up in the middle of the night. Having a lot of food immediately before bed, also not a great idea because you're going to spend a lot of time and resources in terms of digestion, not as much in terms of the actual distributing nutrients around the body to recover and repair. It can also be uncomfortable as well to fall asleep if you're on a full stomach. You might have experienced that previously. It is quite difficult. And caffeine's the obvious one as well. When we talked about before about having a quiet room, perfect room temperature, things like caffeine is just going to stimulate that ability to stay awake. So it's really going to kind of, I guess, contradict some of those ideas of creating a really calm sort of environment. It's going to keep you quite alert, and again, also make it more difficult to sleep. What I will say on the caffeine side of things, there is some good research in terms of having caffeine immediately before a nap, but a nap is different to going into your full sleep and your I guess, your biggest block of sleep each day overnight. It's the type of thing that having caffeine before a nap, you can actually double the effect. If you have some caffeine, have a coffee, and then fall asleep like immediately after you've had it, so if within 5-10 minutes, you can actually get a bit of a bonus effect when you wake up again. But the nap's got to be about 40-45 minutes. It can't really be too long. It has to be a short one. And then we go and sort of you feel a bit of a double wake up effect at the end, which can be useful. But when we're going for sleep of 6, 7, 8 hours in length, it's not going to be very useful at all. Number 5 is avoiding screen time. Now, this is kind of similar to working in with quiet rooms and things like that. And I'll actually add this onto number 6 as well in terms of creating a dark space. It's light sources like our devices and avoiding screen time, or having the lights on external if you're a shift worker or you have to sleep on different hours and it's very bright, as you can see through the window today. Maybe blocking out the room, getting as dark as possible, removing some of that screen time so you don't have light coming directly in. What that's going to do is set the body into a much more natural body clock position. And coming back to the routine side of things, typically humans, if you just took out all the electricity and all the devices, humans evolved based on how the sun rises and sets, because hormones within the body are released at certain times of the day. We get a boost of essentially wake up hormones when the sun starts to rise, because there's light coming in, there's stimulus, it's telling us, okay, we need to be awake and be doing things. Once it starts getting dark, our body starts going into shutdown mode because we get a slightly different release and balance of hormones that cause us to get more into that sleepy state. So removing some of that screen time takes out some of that, I guess, external stimulus, messing up that natural body clock pattern. Removing that screen time about 30-45 minutes before bed is probably more ideal. Trying not to sit on your phone and things like that in bed. Try to keep the bedroom, or as much as you can, a sleep space. For me, that's meant that I've had to have my desk in a completely separate room and my office space in a separate room, so that when I know I'm going into my bedroom, it's because I'm going in to relax and go to sleep. I'm not distracted by anything else. There's nothing in my way to sort of I guess, have some light sources coming in. The only thing I'm bad at is my phone, and a lot of you probably are as well. I have my phone pretty close next to me when I sleep. I've actually moved it a little bit further away now, so I have to get out, put my phone away, and then I can get back into bed and sort of leave it aside. So that's one strategy I've used, but yeah, try to keep off the screen time, but also make sure the room is as dark as possible, particularly if you do have to sleep at awkward times of the day. Can just help to create a much better environment overall. Number 7 is the nap side of things. Napping is good. As I mentioned before, having short naps, 45 minutes is great. You can have some caffeine just before you nap, fall asleep, and then you get a bit of a double hit. But napping after sort of 3-4 p.m. late afternoon is not really a good idea, because it's going to start to throw that routine I was just talking about out the window. It's going to push back when you feel like you need to sleep. I've done it before, and I'm guilty of it. You have a hard training session, or you do something during the day, you have a race, you go and fall asleep at sort of 4:30, 5 o'clock, you wake up, so 6:30, and then you're like, well, I can't really go to sleep, and it's like 11:30, 12 o'clock at night, and then you have to wake up the next day at a normal time, 6:30, 7:30, whatever it might be. It's going to put your routine way out, and you get a shorter sleep there. It's the type of thing, bring that forward as best you can. If you really need to nap, take it, but keep it to 45 minutes. One sleep cycle is about right. Any longer than that, you start to feel a bit lethargic, and you kind of, I guess, not really making the most of the nap cycle, and you end up wasting a bit at the end of the day, because you're not going to be awake in a good frame of mind, and you're not going to really feel refreshed. You might feel a bit slow and sluggish. Napping is definitely useful. I'm not knocking it. It's a good way to catch up, particularly some of the shift workers. I've had questions before about, well, what do you do with sleep and shift work and irregular hours, things like that. It's a good way to catch up as best you can. But again, try to keep them short naps, make them really effective, and try not to have them too late. For the average person, try not to have them too late in the afternoon. If it fits in for you because you have to go work overnight, bit different, but try not to keep them after mid-afternoon as best you can, to try and keep that routine of your normal sleep, where we're going to get the bulk of it, as consistent as possible. The last thing I need to talk through here is, we hear about 8 hours a lot, and this is tip number 8, is 8 hours of sleep is the average for a normal person. I've spoken about this before in that recovery iceberg video, is that the average person who may not be doing much training, is just going to work, things like that, 8 hours of sleep is what's recommended. Athletes typically need more sleep, and I'll put a little graphic up on the screen showing lacking numbers of sleep hours actually pushes up the likelihood of injury in athletes, and that's why a greater amount of time sleeping is really, really critical. And all of these tips I've talked through to try and get 8.5, 9 hours of sleep a night is much more critical than sort of six or 7, because of this recovery process. The more time we can spend sleeping and the more quality sleep we get because of some of these things we've been through today, the better we are in terms of recovery process, but also because we're better at recovery, we're going to be less likely to engage in injuries or things like that. So there's going to be less damage to the body. The body can repair and recover, and then we're going to be able to perform as a result, because at the end of the day, if we're getting injured because we're not able to recover properly, we're then not going to be able to train as effectively as we can, and it's sort of this negative cycle we can't break. Good sleep leads to good recovery, leads to great performance is a good, simple way of looking at it. So hopefully you got something out today. They're just the 8 tips and steps that I go through when I'm talking with athletes and going through my own processes for sleep. Is there anything else you like to do? Leave that in the comments down below in terms of routines or what you normally like to do before you go to bed, and how you maximize your sleep. Love to hear what your thoughts are and any different tips to what I've talked about, or do you already implement some of these tips and there's a few that you didn't think about previously that you're now going to start to implement. Leave them in the comments below. As always, leave your questions down there, because I love listening to the questions and discussing some different ideas with you guys. Make sure you do hit the subscribe button as always, and that is it for today, so we'll see you in the next one.